Good afternoon, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us in the newsroom stage today. My name is Stephanie and I'm from Leeds City Council Regeneration Team. So we've got a great panel up for you next. We have had a change in chair, but firstly I'd like to say a quick thank you to our sponsors Acivico Group. And the panel event is Neighbourhood-led Retrofit, delivering more than just energy efficiency. So thank you, Jenny, for stepping into chair at the last minute, and I will now hand you over to Jenny to introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Can everyone hear me all right? Yes, brilliant. So my name is Jenny Ludford, and I'm from Story, which is Civico's PR consultancy, stepping in at the last minute for the managing director, Marina, who unfortunately has got sciatica, and it's not very comfortable. So I'm doing it. Take pity on me, please. So what we're here today to talk about is obviously retrofit and how neighbourhood-led retrofit, why that is good for communities and how it's about so much more than just energy efficiency. What we're going to do is take questions at the end, if that's all right. But if anybody does have a desire to actually ask something, you're desperate, please put your hands up. Otherwise, about 4:15, we'll come to the audience and we'll have a roving mic and go around and ask questions from everybody. So if we talk about Acivico Group, not that many people will probably know who Acivico are, but they are a purpose-led, sorry I'm popping here, purpose-led multidisciplinary business from Birmingham in the built environment. And we use the hashtag actually building for good. So it's all about the positive societal impacts that Acivico can make in the community, from things like contributing £140 million to the Birmingham area over the last 10 years, through to helping train up people for to meet the skills gap, really, that we've got in this country, and all sorts of other different things that the business does from a corporate social responsibility. But today we're here to actually talk about effectively a pioneering project, which Ying is going to talk about in a few minutes, that was done in an area of Birmingham called Balsall Heath, which is quite a deprived area of Birmingham, has a lot of vulnerable people. And that project, the Acivico Group basically took nearly 700 homes and retrofitted them. And each of those homes was given a basic, well, not basic, but each house within those 700 properties was looked at individually to see what they needed to get to be energy efficient. So it wasn't a case of copying one property to the next and putting everything the same in each property, like wall insulation. It was done bespokely with assessments. So Ying will talk through that. And on the panel, we've got lots of people, as you can see. I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves. Quite a lot of the people on the panel were involved in the LAD 3 project in Balsall Heath, so they can talk you through that. But if we start down the end, please, Ellie, with if you could introduce yourself, and we'll go round this way.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ellie Horrich-Smith. I'm the Assistant Director at Birmingham City Council, leading on Net Zero. So my involvement was in engaging with members of the community and kind of bringing forward the funding opportunity and leaving this great kind of group of people to do such an amazing job.
Ayushi?
Hi everyone, I'm Ayushi. I work at the West Midlands Combined Authority in a team called Energy Capital, which is basically a fancy term for the Net Zero team for the West Midlands. I look after a program called Net Zero Neighbourhoods, which is really cool. We're looking at testing the neighbourhood approach to retrofit and decarbonisation, and we've got 7 demonstrator projects, 1 in each of our local authority areas. So I actually am probably one of the few people on the panel who wasn't directly involved in the Balsall Heath project, but we've taken a lot of learnings from community-led projects like the Balsall Heath project, like the work that Imi's been doing as well, and adapting it into our neighbourhood approaches and testing to see if we can sit in the middle between community-led, neighbourhood-led schemes and kind of communicating the benefits of those projects to people like UKREiiF in the private sector. So we kind of sit in the middle.
Brilliant. Imi?
Hi everybody, I'm Imi. I'm one of the co-founders at Civic Square. We are an unlikely character in the retrofits scene, and I'll tell you a bit more why we got involved later on. But we weren't directly involved in the LAD 3 programme, but Balsall Heath is part of, Balsall Heath Retrofit is part of a group that have been organising about reimagining retrofit to be from the neighbourhood up. And so I was one of the people behind Retrofit Reimagined, and we're also doing a demonstrator in our neighbourhood, Ladywood in Birmingham, very much focused on showing what can be possible when we take a street-by-street approach and a neighbourhood-led approach.
Fantastic. Dan?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Daniel Camp. I'm head of Retrofit and Building at Dodd Group, and we were the principal contractor that delivered this project alongside Acivico, TAS, and Birmingham City Council.
Hi, I'm Ellie Tay. I'm one of the assistant directors at the UK Infrastructure Bank in the Local Authority Advisory and Lending team. For those of you who don't know, the UK Infrastructure Bank is the government's relatively new-ish green infrastructure bank. We have a focus on tackling climate change and supporting local regional economic growth. So I have a focus on working with local authorities to deliver retrofit and building decarbonisation programmes. Whilst we didn't work with Birmingham directly on this, it's a great project, and I think we're really keen to learn from the lessons and the successes that were achieved during this and help replicate that across other local authorities with similar ambitions.
Brilliant. Taz?
Hi everyone. 2 years ago, I didn't know what the word retrofit was. I was working in a charity as an artist doing some research. The charity was in the middle of Balsall Heath, and it was a Citizens Advice Bureau. And we worked with a whole group of brilliant people to help do some community engagement. So looking forward to sharing some of the insights.
Actually, that works nicely for you, Ying, to talk about. You worked very closely, obviously, with Taz on engaging the community. Do you want to take us through your slides that you've got?
Just quickly say, my name is Ying Man, Associate Director at Acivico, and I led on the LAD 3 scheme. So,
yeah.
Okay. So neighbourhood-led retrofit. If we need to duplicate this all over the country if we're going to reach net zero 2050. Birmingham's got a net zero target of 2030 as well. So it's really important that we understand how this works. So all of you guys are here. This is going to be a good learning. It was a very, very difficult scheme. We had lots of stakeholders, but at the end, what we achieved, it was enjoyable working with all different groups, and the results, to me, I thought it was amazing. So, these, just looking at that, we had 13 months to get this scheme. We retrofitted 700 properties, close to 700 properties. See the results there. From September to October, we carried out 2,300 mail shots. We had over 50 energy cafes, 1,000+ resident applications, assessments completed, property installs, measures, over 1,500 measures, and clerk of work inspections. So all this was carried under the PAS 2035 specification. It's a new specification. There's still people out there don't understand how PAS work, and PAS is a changing beast. Every 6 months there are the specification changes. These are all our stakeholders involved, ranging, but I must say, without a council support, with Birmingham City's council logo on this project, I would say, wouldn't be as successful, because the council gave the provenance to the householders, that it gave confidence. So we had the MEC, eHouse, CoreLogic, who'd done our assessments, Dodds, Equans, our contractors, installation. So over 50, we had support from the local MPs and councillors, so over 15 stakeholders. Oops. It's blank here, but we could talk about the key challenges and successes in a minute. Oh, There it is. So, like sort of community engagement. In UKREiiF, about 80% of the population there were Kashmirian. We had language barrier, so with the support of the Met Trust, we could overcome the barrier. And most importantly, not just UKREiiF, in the whole of the UK, if you ask 10 people, what is Retrofit? I would say at least 80% wouldn't understand what Retrofit is. So how can we persuade the householders, landlords to support us on the programme? Language barrier, understand building trust, the customer journey. Do you know what past 2035? Do you know how many processes we have to go through? They say if you have the past 25 specification, there's over 100 processes. And to access the grant funding, we have to go through every single process. It's just to name a few. From Retrofit, right at the beginning, Retrofit advice, we have to look at pre-EPCs, Retrofit assessments, evaluation, the coordination. There's so many steps. We have to communicate with the community each step. Otherwise, I was involved in the first Retrofit scheme in London, 2015. There was over 40% rejection rate. And it wasn't as much where the grant was for £4,000. Why would householders reject basically free money? It's understanding what Retrofit is, what is the benefit, why. The question I keep asking, why Retrofit? And then the scale and delivery. 13 months to deliver 650 properties. 13 months, and that is through the PAS. It is a lot of work there. But that work, with support with all the stakeholders, that work could be shortened. We need the community on our side to communicate with the residents and landlords. Right, this is the outcome. 16,673 oak trees in a year. That's the carbon emission we saved. 75% increased their EPC band by 1 band or more. So at least 9 SAT points. That is good for all the householders. And improve the living standard of the most deprived area. We chose UKREiiF because it was in the deprivation 1, 2 and 3. So there's more children on school meals, so there's high unemployment. That's very important. Educate and upskill local people through mentoring and formal training. In a minute, we will explain about how we help skill the community group, understanding Retrofit, and put them through training courses. And turbocharge community response to climate action, and the growth of PAS Trust Smart Accredited Supply Chain. Because there's not enough. We need 500,000 people by 2030 if we want to reach 2050 net zero gain. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And the Met Trust through Lads 3, because they learnt about the Retrofit, they could attain £860,000 in a lead project because of their learning through retrofitting. And social value, we invested 53,000 into the local community. There's a community scheme where we're going to do a handover on the 5th of June called Fox Hollies, where we installed 24 kilowatts of solar panels in there, and that will benefit the local community, Fox Hollies. Okay, so back to you.
Thank you, Ying. I hope you can agree that there are a lot of amazing positives and outcomes that have come from that project, and we'll talk more about that as we go along to the panel. Ayushi, I wanted to just ask you, in the West Midlands, retrofit funding has been devolved to the combined authority. So what are the challenges that you foresee from that perspective?
Yeah, so the devolution process is really interesting. So for those who don't know kind of combined authorities, I'm very new to them myself, but it's essentially an experiment in governance. So the idea is that lots of things, lots of decisions and funding decisions and policy decisions are taken very centrally, and some of those don't really make sense for the region. So in the West Midlands, there's a lot of decisions and funding where it kind of makes sense to take a view regionally. So that's where the kind of combined authority came in and said, actually, we need to activate regional partners here and represent the region to central government and make the case that actually government funding for retrofit at the moment is quite competitive, very pepper-potted, and as everybody in this room probably knows, just a whole minefield. And so to address some of that challenge was basically to say, if you gave us all of that money in one chunk, rather than having to compete for it and apply for it and use a lot of our resource to kind of go through the bidding process. If you gave it to us in one chunk, we could distribute it a bit more efficiently, and we understand our housing stock, we understand kind of the regional partners, the regional stakeholders much better. We can spend it more efficiently to make sure that actually it's being spent in the places it needs to be, and it's being spent on actual retrofit projects. Because I think a lot of the people in this room will know that a lot of retrofit monies from central government end up being returned because they can't be spent. So that's kind of where the devolution process comes in. So where we're at with that, we're currently in negotiations with central government around that kind of, yes, we will trial giving you what's called a single settlement. So in 2025, we actually do have commitment from central government, from DESNZ, that they will trial that approach. They'll give us one chunk of funding that then we will then distribute to our local authority partners. So we're planning for that now. It's going to be a trial, so DESNZ are going to trial it with us and see if it works. So we're prepping for that now to understand, okay, what is the best way that we can kind of split it up? What is the eligibility criteria, learning from kind of LADS and SHDF and ECO and all of that to not repeat those mistakes. So that's kind of where we're at. So it's a really good opportunity. It's not to say that it's going to solve all the problems, but it's hopefully going to allow us to do things a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently. I think the second part of the question was, what are the challenges with that? I think one of the big challenges will probably be just how we work with our local authority partners, and we're really lucky that we've got really good relationships with Birmingham, with Walsall, with Wolverhampton, all of the kind of local authorities in the West Midlands. That's one of the big challenges, and I think political buy-in will also be key. But I think the biggest challenge will be the customer journey and having consistency and kind of trust within that customer journey. So that's where I think the kind of neighbourhood-led, community-led approach is really key to accessing the kind of scale that we need from the buy-in that we need to actually spend retrofit devolved money.
That's interesting in terms of you talking about the neighbourhoods and the communities being involved with that. Imi, do you think that you're very close to the community, particularly in Neighbourhood, but do you think that communities have the expertise and skills to govern effectively?
Also, I guess that's the big question, right? Like, there is capabilities and capacities that need to be built at that layer. But, you know, to take like a connected thought here, like, I don't know if you've ever seen that meme of like what radicalized you, right? So like what made a civic organisation like us suddenly really care about retrofit? And beyond the kind of really big climate story, why was retrofit like the space that we really understood to be a huge leverage point for societal transformation, right? And it was that moment in 2020 when I found out the scale of government funds that were being returned to central government. And I just couldn't quite understand it, right? Because if you speak to anyone in our community or in the many, many communities that we've worked in the city of Birmingham or beyond in our partners across the country, and you say to a neighbour, would you like a warmer, safer, cheaper to run home on a street that is greener, more biodiverse, safer for your children with cleaner air? Nobody's sitting there saying no, right? Like, nobody is saying, no, thanks, I really would not like it. And so for me, this question was like, okay, if that is true, and there is all this money that is being returned, secondly, there is deep skills, wisdoms, a huge amount of agency is able to be exerted in the place where you live, the place that feels closest to you. You might not understand decarbonisation, but you understand that a damp home affects your child's asthma really clearly, right? So if there's all these skills, wisdoms, lived experiences and knowledges that exist at the neighbourhood scale, and then finally, underperforming housing is costing us catastrophically all over the place in our carbon budgets, in our health budgets, in educational attainment, in people's ability to work, in traditional senses, productivity, then this just seems like, there's not many silver bullets. But hold on a second. Surely Retrofit is actually at the heart of the scale of societal transformation we require to move through climate ecological transition. And so for me, it was like, okay, it kind of doesn't matter right now if all the knowledge exists at the neighbourhood scale that we need. But what it is incumbent on communities and incumbent on organisations like mine is to really, really deeply understand that what it requires and what we need to do to build those skills, capabilities, capacities for the things that can be done at one on a DIY and participatory layer, next on a skill building, new skills layer, on a professional services layer, what different parts of different sectors need to get involved and actually start to work towards that, because I don't think we actually have any other options, right? Any other time in society when we've had to make a transition as large as the one we need to make now and hit the kinds of numbers we need to have now, it didn't really matter if we thought it was a nice to have. When we needed to improve all of our health at the end of the war, we had to build the neighbourhood GP to the big neighbourhood, to the NHS, because we have to devolve power, agency, skills, tools, infrastructure to the scale of the people, not just because it's a nice to have, but because practically and pragmatically we cannot hit the scale and the numbers, why hundreds and hundreds of millions are going back consistently, right? And the same has been true in many other parts of history, whether it was the end of the industrial era and education and community libraries. These weren't just massive moments of wealth for the private sector having just having epiphanies. It was also when our economy stopped working in a way, and we needed to unlock something else. So for me, I'd akin Retrofit to that, right? And from there, then you can have a story of we know incredible human imagination, capabilities, capacities can exist. We know in COVID, the way that there was a role that communities and neighbourhoods could play that nobody else could. It wasn't the only role. There's still a role for the city. There's still a role for the region. There's still a role for, the university, the academy, the nation state. But there is an incredibly important and undervalued role at the layer of the street in the neighbourhood that has throughout history been critical to our ability to meet emergency, for our abilities to do big things. So for me, what the starting point then was, as we built Retrofit Reimagined in 2020 and 2021, to really build this movement of many other community organisations working at that civic layer to start to understand was, okay, what do we now need to do? How do we build the capabilities, capacities, knowledge, literacy, what infrastructure is needed, what can be done by the community, what can be grown there, what needs to be done in partnership with other parts of the Retrofit ecosystem. But yeah, fundamentally, it's like, do they exist? In places, yes, all the foundations do exist. Do we need to do some work on that? Absolutely. But is there many other options? I'd say probably not. I think that Retrofit is at the heart of the biggest societal transition that we will see in our lifetimes. The impacts of it across health, across education, across climate, across ecological emergency, across health outcomes will be so profound that I think it's like we don't have an option to be like, can the community do it or not? We have to really turn our attentions and our energies to one of the biggest collaborative efforts that we've seen across the people and the wider sector, and many more, the artists, the neighbours, the grandmas, the faith communities. This is an everybody thing, and so that was our starting point. So long answer to your question, does it exist? Probably not exactly how we need it, but does something incredible exist? Absolutely. And do I think it's a starting point? I think it's probably going to be more than just a nice moral story. I think it's going to be critical to whether we actually make it.
Retrofit is key, isn't it, to getting to the 2050 net zero targets. And I think the Office of National Statistics says that 46% of dwellings in England and Wales are low EPC ratings, so there's loads of work to be done. Dan, you and I talked earlier about the skills gap, and actually that being part of what holds up the retrofit programme. Can you explain a bit more about that? We all know there's a skills gap in the construction sector, but is finding those qualified people who are able to actually put the retrofit into place part of the problem?
It is, yes. So once you build the scale, so if we do all the great work we've already spoken about, and the money's there, and the will is there, and the customers are on board, the delivery of it obviously is paramount. And you're right, there is a massive skill shortage across all industry, but particularly in the construction industry, and particularly in the retrofit space. Again, we mentioned earlier, what is retrofit? We don't talk about it necessarily in education in schools. It's not a job you hear kids say in the playground, that's what they want to do when they leave school. So part of what we need to do is get that into the public sphere. The biggest issue from our point of view is we want to invest, and we do invest in young people and apprenticeships, both on the tools and in the office, and retrofit assessors, retrofit coordinators, all the gaps and all those stakeholders we need. The problem we have at the moment is the stop-start of these projects. So as Ying explained, we had a very short window to deliver this project, and then it fell off a cliff, and then there's different funding comes out, but it's only ever for 6, 8, 9 months, and then it stops again. And it's really difficult to engage young people, particularly in a career where they can't see what that career path is going to lead to. So we need longevity, we need 3, 4, 5, 6 years worth of constant revenue, and hopefully West Midlands Combined Authorities and people like that can, through devolution, we can start to see that. And then we can invest in communities, and we can start to engage more people.
Because it's not just actually fitting, it's not the retrofitting as such as the maintenance afterwards, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, if everyone fits an air source heat pump and then we all walk away, if you don't maintain that, or you don't maintain your PV panels, like any modern technology, if it's not maintained, you will start to lose the benefit of it. So we need to install it today, but we need to maintain it, and we need to train people to look after it into the future to make sure we're getting the best out of it.
Ellie, not this Ellie, we will come to you. Ayushi, Imi and Dan have all mentioned the funding from your UK Infrastructure Bank. How do communities access funding for retrofit?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I should start by saying the bank's only about 3 years old, which in sort of financial institute lifetimes isn't that long. But we were set up, I think bank maybe skews what we were set up to do. We're not totally profit driven. We're there to support local authorities deliver the infrastructure projects that need delivering. So we are able to lend directly to local authorities. That's combined authority level, right the way down to your sort of smaller district unitary councils, at probably about the cheapest rate of debt on the market. So we're currently lending at gilts plus 40, and for those who are familiar with PWLB, it's about 40 basis points lower than what we're lending to. We're also able to, and I think this is what's really key, and where we're really keen to work with local authorities, is provide that level of debt funding to an aggregation of projects. So we all know retrofit isn't that attractive to the private sector because it doesn't generate any revenues. But there are a lot of things within the local authority community that do generate a revenue. And I think there's a real role for the Infrastructure Bank to play in aggregating some of those projects together in a portfolio that looks investable and it looks attractive to the private sector, so we can start leveraging some of that capital into these really core and necessary infrastructure projects that, to the points that have already been made, are absolutely critical to us reaching net zero. And I think until we can start tempting the private sector in, we're going to really, really struggle to get any of them off the ground at scale and in a replicable way. Finance and access to funding is not the only solution to the problem. I think we've already touched on skills gap and incentives to retrofit and the logistics around doing a whole neighbourhood approach. But I think the bank is really there to help and support. And we've worked with WMCA. We do free advisory services as well, so we're happy to come in and workshop some of the problems with local authorities. I think we're trying to play like a convener role in the UK where we see every ambitious project, and so we can start sharing those lessons. Someone said earlier today that plagiarism is the greatest flattery, and I think we're really, really keen to play into that and start sharing some of the success stories.
Brilliant, thank you. Taz, I'm going to come to you. You obviously support and work with some of the most vulnerable people in some of the poorest parts of Birmingham. And Ying mentioned it earlier, you know, the different communities living in Balsall Heath, so English wasn't necessarily a first language for a lot of those people. And how did you, if we're talking about retrofit, it doesn't mean anything it does to everybody in this room, but for a homeowner, retrofit isn't something they understand. So how did you, when you've got language barriers as well, overcome that? Talk us through some of the community work that you did with the Acivico.
So when we found out about Retrofit because there were some local volunteers and activists in our ward that were championing Retrofit, but they were middle-class people with climate anxiety, and they felt that they needed to save the planet. And there was a disconnect straight away because the charity that I work for largely serves very vulnerable members of the BAME community. They are probably on benefits or have low income. They might have someone with a long-term medical condition living with them. They might be intergenerational households, so you might have 3 generations living in one building. And most of the time they're dealing with immediate material day-to-day concerns. They're not looking into the horizon, into the future, into rising temperatures. They're just worried about what's going to happen in the next few days. So even though we understood the data and we understood the argument, we had to transfer that knowledge into something. Without a doubt, it was important. Because if you want to tackle systemic change, you have to look at all the factors. So the first bit of processing we did was, okay, how do we turn this into something the community will understand? The second bit that was really confusing was the industry speak, construction language, jargon, very technical, PAS 2021, whatever it was. What did all these things mean? What the hell does retrofit mean? We thought it was something to do with fashion. And initially we said, don't use the word retrofit. It's a horrible word. Can you find another word, please? And we're like, no, this is a given. This is in the dictionary. It's the first word. So what you have to do is you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the people that you're working with. So local residents were coming in and telling us that their gas bill had gone up by 40% and they didn't know why. They were worried about cost of living. They were worried about the fact that cucumbers now cost £1.20 instead of 60p, and they were worried about how to cope. So the way we broke into that was saying, well, okay, there's a way to save money by making your house more energy efficient, and there's a way to save money by making your house greener, lowering your bills. And so like I said, we didn't know anything about any of this, and all our partners, including Acivico and other volunteers that were invested in this, helped us to deconstruct the language into something where you could communicate something clear and immediate, and then we had to translate that into Punjabi or Mirpuri, which is a dialect of Punjabi. It's like you don't speak like a Londoner, you speak like someone from Newcastle or Aberdeen. And even to that level, those nuances are really important. Who is telling the story? Who is passing on this information? And we also had to translate it into Arabic as well. And from our point of view, we saw Retrofit as a wealth transfer project. So it wasn't about climate anxiety. It was about taking money from the government, from energy companies, wherever it came from, and putting it into the homes of the most deprived residents in Birmingham.
I know that Ying, you did some really amazing work with Taz and the Met Trust on energy champions, and as an ex-journalist, this really stood out to me. Would you like to tell everyone about? I think it's a really USP for this project.
Yeah. How Energy Champions came about was that in the area in Balsall Heath, we're going to be there for maximum 13 months, like the length of the project. How are we going to leave a legacy? When we leave, what are they going to do? Do they still how are they going to communicate about energy efficiency, about retrofit, about the energy language? So one project I did in London was about energy champions, and we thought in Balsall Heath we're going to train up the community that we're working with, get them trained up to at least understand what energy efficiency is, what retrofitting is, so we put them onto a course. So therefore, it's a legacy. It's a legacy for them, and also for us to go in there. If we go into the community and start talking energy fit, people won't trust us. Who are we? We are a company just going there to give some money out, but people in that community trust their people, like the Met Trust we work there. Everyone understands what the Met stands for. They don't understand what Acivico stands for. They don't understand what the energy supplies stands for, or DESNES. Why are they doing this? So therefore, once they understand, it'd be easier to easier for them to explain than us. That's why Energy Champions. Now, we have left that area, but they're still carrying on. That's the legacy we left for them.
We did Jenny and Ying's heading because the council was not trusted. There was fatigue. People didn't want to be sold another utopian campaign, and they didn't believe a lot of the bullshit that that comes through the doors and etc. And so we were like, can you just break it down to us in absolute terms? What is it that we're offering, and can you assure us? Because someone stuck a report by Plymouth Council that I think said that for the last 10 years, I think that the report came out in 2022, so it looked at retrofit over the last 10 years, and it said that retrofit schemes had failed residents. They might have helped other parts of the actors who are delivering retrofit, but it failed residents. So from our point of view, it was like, well, this is going to be a waste of time if it's not going to work, and why are we doing it? So it was really important for us to be involved in the process and feel like we were important collaborators, co-producers, and I think that was an absolutely vital relationship where month by month our plan, our strategy would change, because we were making it up as we went along, because this was new. No one had done this before at this scale, but we had partners that were listening to us and we felt listened. So that was really important.
And Ellie, obviously from the council, so politely talked about there by Taz. But Acivico Group is wholly owned by Birmingham City Council. So from your perspective, you must see this as a real kind of best practice example of what can be done in Birmingham from a retrofit point of view.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, from my perspective, I joined and formed my team only 2.5 years ago. So to have already seen such an amazing project being delivered that we can replicate the kind of key role that community and individuals have is fantastically exciting, particularly as we're developing our kind of more citywide kind of strategy as to how we can roll this out more broadly. But I mean, I think just bringing it even down to the kind of starting point level. I mean, I joined the council and quite quickly was invited by email by someone I hadn't met before to come and hear what they had been doing in their local community. Taz was there amongst a wider kind of group of people who were clearly very passionate about not just the climate agenda, but most importantly, their local community. And I could see that there was already a kind of great cohort of people with whom to work. And I like to think that kind of however small that part played, that kind of really kicked off such an exciting overall project. And I think what I'd just focus on in that is it can often be the most seemingly small of conversations that kind of creates this quite fantastic, exciting opportunity. So what are we doing? I mean, effectively, there's always lots of lessons learned, and I think it's about making sure we do learn those lessons and don't replicate them. So I think in particular, I think the kind of customer journey piece, so it's all very well and good, that fantastic engagement happening, but if you lose people during the process because they don't understand what's happening, they haven't heard for a while, they don't understand kind of when they'll hear back from somebody, and this is not a kind of negative reflection on the process, it's just the reality of one of the key lessons that came out of this process. What that's led to is some kind of innovation work done with a number of companies in the kind of tech industry to say this is a problem. How do we provide this access to customers so they understand what's happening every step of the way and they feel engaged and they feel that they know what's happening, and that's leading to kind of a piece of work that also Dodds has already started picking up in terms of that customer journey. So there is already a key lesson that's being embedded into the kind of next stages and actually kind of contractors as well as others picking up. But I think kind of picking up on some of the kind of points that have already been made, we each have a part to play, but also we need to be ready to step back and let others do their bit too. I mean, we can mobilise and engage with both the funding bodies, be that devolved funding or be that with energy suppliers, to say, look, there's a scale of opportunity here in the city that we can help you mobilise and gain access to. And that's a role that we can play as a city, and that's very much the kind of thing we're focusing on. But are we the best voice for engaging with residents? No, we're frankly not. And actually, I think it's about knitting together the kind of key parts of the system that need to kind of work together and actually kind of facilitating and enabling those other kind of key kind of parts of that system to work. And I think, unfortunately, the retrofit system is at the moment in a number of different ways very broken. And it's very frustrating for myself, who back in 2002, when I kind of started my kind of career in this space, we had this well-invested network of energy advice centres across the country. Not necessarily the most perfect model, but nevertheless were there continuously. People knew who to kind of contact. They were locally based. They provided local support and distribution of funding systems. They also provided referrals into other health and other well-being kind of needs that were needed. And obviously we lost all of that. So that kind of need for that continuity, that place where people know they can go, whether it's this year or in 5 years' time, is really important. So I think the other key takeaway for me is, how do we ensure that after support continues to be available to people through whomever it's best to provide that, but how do we make sure that aftercare is provided? Otherwise we won't deliver the benefit that can be realised for residents, and actually I think we'd just be really kind of missing a trick. So I think that's the kind of way in which we're trying to absorb and embed the kind of learning as we go forward.
Brilliant. Can I ask any of the panel, before we go to questions to the audience, does anybody else have any key lessons that were learnt? Ayushi?
It wasn't a lesson. I just wanted to comment on the point that was made around trust in local authorities. It's really interesting because we're working with the 6 other local authorities as well, and some of that looks very different. So there is some local authorities that we work with where actually there is a huge amount of trust in the local authority, and we've had feedback that said, actually, we're only going to trust someone who comes and knocks on the door who is from a local authority. So it's just really interesting that this, speaking of kind of replicability and aggregation and all that all of these, it's so important to test the kind of community-led, neighbourhood-led approach in lots of different places, because that delivery model will look so different depending on the unique characteristics of that neighborhood, and kind of to that point of building trust. Trust looks really different for different places. So, you know, in Birmingham, it may be that it's kind of the local community, the kind of people like Met Trust who are more trusted. In some places, that is actually, you know, the council. In some places, actually, maybe by magic, they do trust their energy supplier really well. Who knows? But that's that's where we're at this point. So in order to get to that kind of long term, we need to scale this up, and we need to aggregate, and we need to like do hundreds and thousands of neighborhood approaches. It starts very much with, let's test actually what the neighborhood approach looks like in loads of different spaces to understand who it is that needs to hold those long-term relationships, to build that trust, to kind of keep coming back to the community and saying, oh, you've got a problem with your heat pump that you installed a year ago. I know exactly how I'm going to help you with that. So those things are, I think, really key, but it's really interesting to see how different they look across different communities as well. So it was just a point rather than a lesson learned.
That's a very interesting point. Like you say, the takeaway from that is it's not one size fits all. Every community needs to be understood, looked at from its demographic, its makeup, its cultures, its religions, and so on, and you work bespokely depending on that. Can I ask the audience if, yes, you have a question? Thanks, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Lewis Holiday from Camden Council. It's an amazing project. My question, Imi, you said this is the social transformation of our generation, and then Ellie, you said the retrofit system is broken to an extent. And so my question is, how do we take this and do it at the scale, at the speed, and in a way that is this inclusive, that will actually achieve what we need to achieve? Because I think at the moment it's so hard to fathom how, you know, this is amazing with 650 homes, but you said half the UK's homes need to be done, and it just doesn't feel that the scale of the challenge in any way the system or the concepts are set up, or even the will is there to achieve the challenge that needs to be met.
Who from the panel would like to start with that? Ying, have you got any thoughts?
You are absolutely correct there. How are we going to achieve that? Because one of my biggest lessons there, because the EPs, we to scale up the retrofit, this is Neighbourhood. With Neighbourhood, they're trusted. How are we going to get to the hard to reach, hard to treat properties? And also, 25% of EPCs hasn't got EPCs. 25 million properties, I would say 5 million. How do we get to those? And the only way to get to those is through the neighbourhood, but scale, and through the neighbourhood, then what we need to do is get neighbourhood contractors involved to scale it up, get more people, local contractors who are doing sort of rebuilding, doing work anyway, like sort of loft, but we need them to get the past 2030, 19. Because at the moment, there is getting accreditation is such a stumbling block at the moment. There's the hurdles, the application forms. Some of those guys are not doing external wall insulation, but to get accreditation for 2030, they need 3 visits. How are they going to get the 3 visits if they're not going to do it at the moment? So how are we going to scale up retrofitting? So there must be a change by the government or by PAS to change some approach to scale it up. What we're doing, we're in no way hit the 2050 target. 25 million homes, 20 million. How many homes each year? About 1 million homes each year. How are we going to do that? The only way we can do it, local people, local assessors, getting easier to get the PAS 2030 and make it work. So there are wheels out there. I've been talking to lots of people who want to get trained up. It's the costs and the red tape, all the applications. We need more academies as well to support this.
Anybody else on the panel like to add to that?
Yeah,
Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the message goes right back to the question we had earlier, what is retrofit? And most people in the room because the fact you're sitting here listening, you'll understand what it is to an extent. And Taz made the point, what is retrofit? We need to get the message out to everybody in the UK that retrofit is a thing. That's part of the journey to 2050, 2030. What is retrofit? We need to get that education out there, and then people will start to form community groups and they will start to put their names forward to have the work done. At the moment, we're pushing on a very closed door. And again, I think, Taz, you mentioned earlier on, the number of flyers, the number of posts you see on Facebook and other social media, you're entitled to a free boiler, you're entitled to a free this, that and the other. And a lot of it is just lead generation. And we need to cut that out. And we need to say, if somebody comes to your door and they says, we're going to retrofit your EWI for free, this is what you need to do to check that they are correct. So Trustmark is, we were having a conversation earlier, one of the members on the panel is having some work done, and they said, how do we know we've got a trusted partner? So Trustmark is a great start, but again, we need to get that message out there. We need to combat all the false message, and without sounding like Mr. Trump, all the fake news that's flying around, and actually point people who live behind these front doors. What is retrofit? How do you access it? And how do you know what you're accessing is actually correct and that you will be left with a proper job and not a fly-by-night? I think that education's the starting point, like it is for all these things.
Anybody else on that? Yeah?
Oh, go on. No, go on, Ellie. No, go on, Ellie. You go first.
Sorry, Emmy. I didn't see
No, it's okay.
Well,
Ellie, go first.
Well, I'll be very brief. I think this is a kind of high level. I know there's lots of nuances in it, but I think we need to build demand, and we've talked a lot about how you can build demand and with whom that demand is built. I think we really need continuity. And there are funding streams which have, well, I say funding streams, there are sources of funding for retrofit or for energy efficiency, to use a better phrase, which is probably no better actually, that have been available for quite a long time to a greater level demand. There's just been no channel through which to build the engagement. So what is now known as the energy company obligation started out as the energy efficiency commitment in 2002. So there has been a form of funding available for a long time, but actually the peaks and troughs in through whom you can receive advice to access that, as well as the nature and the flexibility and the constraints on who that funding is available to, causes part of the problem. So that continuity is really, really important. And I think through that you have to prove the benefits, both to the individual in a home, but also the benefits and the outcomes that you can then sell to investors to build that certainty. And I think, and obviously Dan would be best to kind of respond to this, but I think if you do that, the supply chain will respond because there will be market demand, there'll be market certainty, and they'll invest in people, they'll invest in the skills. So I think you kind of just need to build it and they will come, so to speak. And I can't remember who actually said that phrase. I think it was probably someone famous. But I think that is kind of what we're talking about. But that's how I would distill at a high level the kind of key components. But Amy.
Thank you. I'm probably the one you can throw the tomatoes at, to be honest, on a panel like this. And I'm okay with that because I want to start by saying the approach we're taking at Civic Square and Retrofit Reimagined and all the like communities across the country, in Glasgow, in Walthamstow, in UKREiiF, in Ladywood, Bristol, there's tons of demonstrators I can show you, right? Like I can point you to them. So we're not like sitting around being doomist about it, not at all. We are out every day trying to build different parts of what the neighbourhood entity looks like, what the street entity looks like, what the governance looks like, what the skills look like, working with people at National Retrofit Hub, Rachel Owens, I can see her at the back, one of the co-directors, to look at what this looks like at scale. So what I'm about to say is not in like when I leave this, I just kind of go home and go, oh, well, said my bit, good luck to the rest of the field, right? Like we're on it, sleeves rolled up, literally trying to build alongside. And like we've had a really great time with both Dan Gregory and Ellie at the council about what it will mean for us to be able to continue to build our demonstrators, knowing the part of the system we're trying to be on is on the edge, to like pull beyond this idea that maybe how we're organised might not get us there. So this is the tomato throwing bit, and I'm kind of okay with it. I think, but I've never been to UKREiiF before, so actually I don't know. Look like you guys are some serious people, right? You've got suits on and everything. But Al's been looking after me really well. But we just released a piece of research with our partners at Dark Matter Labs called 3 Degree Neighbourhood, looking at the systemic risks over the next 20 to 30 years, right? What we're currently on track for, given the high emissions scenario that we're still in, right? It talks a lot about carbon tunnel vision. It talks a lot about, critically, of course, we need to retrofit, but we're also going to have a cooling issue soon. We're also going to have huge issues with air pollution. We're going to have huge issues with urban heat island effect in places like Ladywood. We've got so many different things that are going to interplay, right? So the street and the neighbourhood for us is looking at this in a systemic way. It is true to both say, we don't have time to do it this nuanced, we don't have time to do it this detailed, we just got to slam that solar on the roofs, we've got to get that insulation into the walls. Except by the time we might get there, we're like, hold on, shit, how do we create cooling spaces? Because in 2022, 6,500 excess deaths happened in the space of 2 weeks because we hit 40 degrees for the first time in a long time in the UK. And so we're going to be really out of sync with a lot of these things. And in that radical honesty and in the work we've done in 3 Degree Neighbourhoods, it's not to be doomist, it's to be honest, to be able to step into that challenge and say, not convinced that how we're organised is going to get us there, right? And I don't know what the tipping point is going to be. I don't know if it's going to be underperforming housing and all the health effects. I don't know if it's going to be the ambulances lined up because we've got challenges in the infrastructure of the NHS. But there are going to be tipping points. At those moments, our economy will start to grind to a halt. You'd argue that we're already on the way there. Many, many different times in history when that happens, we end up with a public something approach. A public good approach could be public-private. In my world, we're talking public-civic. The Overton window opens up, and we don't have marginal solutions anymore. We have solutions that are going to have to be all societal. We've seen them every 60 to 70 years. We have it. You can go back. We're just about on time for another one, but this time it's at a scale that is beyond. Now, I'm not saying that means we drop everything that we're talking about here, but we do have to be able to entertain that we might have to organise differently. We might have to entertain that we might not be able to do all of this for profit. We might have to entertain that we might not be able to do it in the ways that we've understood our economy until now. I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but I'm just saying that all of these numbers, these timelines, carbon tunnel vision, all the other pile-ups that we're getting now in our infrastructure and in our services might require us to have to do something very different to what we've done until now. And we look back in British history, the things that we can kind of ennoble ourselves in British history with is that we do actually meet those moments pretty well. We have done it. We have done it loads and loads of times, whether it be starting from your smallest, like Roundtree and Cadbury examples of building housing for the workers, whether it's like, we've got these examples. I'm saying that in all of that, we've squandered so much time as it is, right? We've squandered so much time trying loads and loads of different things. So I do get that we can say, how are we going to do this with this much nuance and this much, that's yet to be figured out. But when that window opens up, and it's going to be soon, I don't know which government it's going to open up for. What is it going to get filled with? And so that's the kind of work that I think this sector needs to do, is the solutions have to be on the table in really brilliant and radical ways, whatever your starting point is, that it isn't just filled up with fascism, we can't do anything, and we let the most marginalised people actually just be the first casualties of that, because we have precedents of doing that in the world, right? We've decided that the global south is cool, man, that they can be flooded and their infrastructure can go to pieces. We've already decided that one. So there is a precedence for what will happen in this country. So I think it really is about personal and collective leadership, because you have to figure out who you want to be when that moment and that window opens up. Arguably for me, it's already open. It's wide open. The numbers don't stack up. Aside from the heat and cooling piece, we're putting petrochemical materials into our houses. right? When we know we're not meant to be doing that and we don't have the material budget for that, we need to move towards bio-based materials. So like, I think there's a whole world of opportunity about to open up. You can see it as doom, or you can see it as a moment where society steps up. And I think every project that you run, every scheme, every pound, every street, every home, every bunch of houses you get to decide what story you're going to stack to this. And then personally, I think a big societal moment will have to open up, and the state is going to have to turn up with something pretty epic to turn this round because of the things that are going to come. So I think in that, honesty is a lot of empowerment for how we all show up. It's not a defeatist point of view. It just requires us to be more honest about where we're at and whether we can just keep repeating the same attempt. If we just do more of this, maybe it will work. I'm not convinced by that.
I vote IMI for Prime Minister, actually. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, there's lots. Okay, the gentleman just here. Yes, thank you. And then we'll go to the lady. Oh, sorry, you're after.
Speaking of new Prime Ministers, I think the election's just about to be called. I'm Amy Norman. I'm from Public First. We're a policy research agency in London, and I do a lot of work on decarbonisation and retrofit. I did have two, so I'll just reduce that to one, which is probably a little bit more for the whole panel. A lot of talk about the word retrofit and people, whether they understand it, households, how do you get them on board? But a lot of you have stuck with the word retrofit. We do a lot of public opinion work as well, and I'm personally in favour of moving to language like home upgrades, energy upgrades. What's your view on sticking with a kind of convoluted word like retrofit, which in our focus groups, people think that means going back to an older state of something, not new and better. So yeah, do we stay with that word?
Taz, you talked about the community not necessarily understanding through this project. You're probably a good person to start responding.
Yeah, I mean, we really struggled with the word retrofit. And the point is that effectively we're just telling a story. This is all rhetoric. We are trying to convey something important about the world, about the environment, but also trying to understand a story about, for example, residents in a very deprived part of Birmingham. So the language you use and where it comes from and who articulates it is all really important. And I feel like most of the time the retrofit speak is corporate stroke construction industry speak, and then we have to sort of do the job of facilitation and translation, which is kind of condemning the system that we're operating in, because the system is broken, the system is transactional, and we need to have something a bit more socialist, Marxist, I don't know, but there has to be another way of looking at this, and part of that will be about the language and who owns it and who's articulating it. I hate the word retrofit, but it feels like there's no other word right now.
To take your point, though, really, retrofit is upgrading properties to be more energy efficient, isn't it? But hence what you were saying about home upgrades. I'm just thinking, Ying, about the energy cafes as well that you ran as part of this project. Energy cafes, even, you're talking about retrofit when you're doing it, aren't you? But did you badge that up as a term because people didn't understand what retrofit is? So does that kind of get closer to how to explain it?
Yeah, retrofit, it is a difficult language. And what you said about home upgrade, I feel it's easier to understand. When we did those energy cafes, we talk about energy efficiency measures. Instead of retrofitting, we understand it. It is so difficult for the normal people to understand. So we try to also use other languages, but explain what the measures are. Just like sort of these simple measures. Now Paz is saying about fabric first. What of even fabric first? Fabric. To the normal people, you go fabric first. What? What are you talking about? So we have to explain about external wall insulation, internal wall insulation. Then when you go into external, internal, they don't understand. Even external, it's difficult. It's really difficult. How are we going to make it simpler? I do not know. I do not know.
I think that's down to PR people like us who have to talk in layman's terms about what retrofit really is, to be fair. Anybody else have any views? Yes,
Just comment super quickly on that. Is that working? I'll just talk loudly. I think those of us in the room have come to this because it's a retrofit talk and we're probably all retrofit enthusiasts, so the word's not going to go anywhere. It's a buzzword probably for us. And I think we're all really, really good at talking about the what and the how. But what we probably need to focus on more when we start talking about this to homeowners, residents, people in the community is the why and the incentives. And retrofit probably isn't going to go anywhere, but there's a narrative we need to spin about why retrofit, and it's because it's going to improve your quality of life. It's going to provide a warmer home. It's going to provide more affordable and sustainable costs of energy, and everybody's doing it. It's a proved concept. We're all going to do it, and I think that's where the narrative should focus on when we're engaging with the community, is why. And
you're right, because the UK Green Council says that when you do these measures in your homes, people can save up to £2,000 a year on their energy bills. Now, that's a lot, right? So it is, as I say, it's about how it's comms, I think, how it's put across. And actually, Taz, you just said you had an idea.
So when we started our energy cafes, we kind of had a script that was given to us, cut and pasted from different places, explaining to us what retrofit was. And from that, we broke that down into what we imagined to be questions in the minds of residents when they came to visit us. So we had speech bubbles, and each one asking what we thought would be a pertinent question. And what we realized was that after a few iterations of energy cafes, what they actually turned into was storytelling cafes, where people were just coming in saying, guess what's happened to my bill, or this is how I'm cooking and it's really inefficient. And then someone at some point said, actually, everyone's just telling stories. So one of the things that's evolved out of the energy cafes is storytelling cafes, where most of the time people are just talking about how they're thinking about managing budgets, cooking, how they're sharing a house, all of these things, which are kind of all anecdotally incredibly important. So that's one way we're thinking about everything.
And just to be on brand for Story, we're all about telling stories that matter. So that is perfect, right? So Story will solve the retrofit problem by just constantly talking about energy saving. This gentleman had a question. I think that will have to be our last because we're overrunning by almost 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, it's Matt Malloy from Refurb and Retrofit magazine, so I'm stuck with that name as well. I was going to ask the panel, we find increasingly when we go around and speak to people about the issues that they don't see representation of themselves when they're talking about whether they want to get retrofit. So is there something to be said for an increasing number of case studies where people can see, like, there's some wonderful stories here, but I swear half of the people that need to know those stories aren't hearing them. So how do we go about telling more case studies, or how would that affect the work that you're all doing?
Yeah, Aishi?
Just a kind of signpost, something that's really cool that's already happening in Birmingham that kind of might help. So it's called the Birmingham Green Doors Initiative. I'm sure you know about it. And it's basically just highlighting people who've had retrofit in their homes, and they open up their homes and people can come and visit. And I think it's like every month, once a month or something like that. So those are pretty cool. But again, I think to your point around like seeing people who look like them, a lot of times people who can afford retrofit, will fit a certain demographic, and kind of what Taz said are kind of people who have the luxury to be climate anxious. So I think there's a really important role to play in perhaps, and I don't know who needs to play this, we're struggling with that at the moment at the Combined Authority, where we're like, okay, we're kind of indirectly responsible for lots of really cool measures being installed. How do we capture those stories? Is it us who goes out with a camera and, takes a video of Mr. Khan? Like, who is it that's responsible for telling those stories? So there is, I think, more that can be done. There's some stuff that's happening that is cool, but there's work to be done to create that kind of diverse representation of oh, someone like me can also participate in this and can also benefit from this. And it comes down to that point that you made earlier about like, how can this be delivered at scale and speed, but also be inclusive? And I think the neighborhood approach is really important for that, because you make sure that everybody in the neighborhood has an offer, or everybody in the neighborhood is going to benefit in some way. And it may not be immediately that they get EWI or a heat pump. It may be that actually they just get convinced to not pave over their front gardens, for example. So it's kind of, I think, starting with those little things of like, let's make sure everybody sees benefits from this, and then they'll start to kind of, can finish that point in a good way, but you know what I mean.
No, excellent. Anyone else want to offer? Yeah,
Go on. I've never read your magazine, but I definitely will after this. Thank you. But no, I was going to say, like, the story piece is so important, right? But it's like I'm assuming from your angle, like it's about having all those scales of stories. The like entrepreneur in the private sector doing something, the combined authority, the National Retrofit Hub, the street that's doing something amazing. Like, I think it's important to have those case studies at all different scales. And then I guess for me, I'm interested in tipping over that into the zeitgeist. Like, when I was a kid, you'd read about people, in my case, like women, and the cool stuff they were doing. And that's how you kind of decided, or I started to think about who I wanted to be in the world. And there just are so many good characters in this story. Like, whether you're going to be like a public servant like Ellie, or whether you're going to do what Rachel and Sarah are doing at the National Retrofit Hub, whether you're going to do what like Power are doing in Walthamstow, which is a totally punk approach, but they're doing retrofit. And so I do think like there is a real responsibility to just like make this a bit cooler, please. Like, we need that help. And also, like, on the point, it's connected to that point of, do you use the word or not? For us, it's just both and. Retrofit Reimagined having a film coming out soon, and you'll see it. It's just magical. And we use that word because we want to reclaim it. We want to pull it back from it's just these couple of things. No, it's the fundamental transformation of our places through these types of measures. These are the most important ones, or these are the ones we've decided. And then other times it's like a warmer home. Other times it's like greening your front garden. We've started with front garden retrofit kits that are furniture, putting a bench, having a cup of tea, starting the conversation. And obviously we don't start with that, like come and have a cup of tea to retrofit your home. It's like a bench thing. They're painting benches, or they're doing a sharing library. So there's like as always, a multitude of responses. But yeah, I would really say that media need to step up and like do a little bit of kind of both the case studies at different scales of stakeholders in the sector, but also just like start featuring really wicked people, right? Because most are just millennials who were looking at other wicked people and somehow have ended up in retrofit. Is not what I read about in Cosmopolitan when I was younger. But like the stuff I get to do is pretty cool now. So I just think there's just like a balance of this. And then obviously, like Taz said, the real deep kind of piece of stories that really are the most marginalised people being able to be at the forefront of those stories. And there's incredible stories in UKREiiF, like if you see what's happening on Melrose Place, the energy champions and stuff, like the unlikely stories are really, really critical. But I would say it's like an overall approach, because we definitely need to just see ourselves in different sectors as well and different parts of the story.
I think, that's it. We'll finish now. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm really pleased that it's gone on so long, because you obviously all found it really good.